Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Cellarcast, episode 170, the big 170. Forgive me if I'm a little bit slow today. I haven't had too much food. In fact, right before I started recording, I was like, I'm hungry, I'm going to get something to eat. And I opened my refrigerator to find that we had more air than food, if you know what I mean. It was essentially tortillas, lunch meat, and some condiments. So I made a sandwich for myself and then went to talk to my dad to ask him, what's the grocery plan looking like? I don't make enough money yet to the point where I can actually go out and buy the groceries myself. So he usually just does that, and I just kind of let him do it. I don't know, it's his thing. He's the grocery guy, and what you have to understand about my father is that his diet for the last 2-3-ish years has consisted of one meal, which is that twice a day he will eat 6 hamburger patties, and that's it. And he drinks water. He drinks water. My enunciation's all off today. He eats 6 hamburger patties twice a day with water, and as a lemonade specifically. And he's eaten that almost exclusively for the last 2-3 years at this point. So when I say, hey, we don't have any food in the house, he goes, what? Do we not? I'm like, no, actually we don't. He's like, well, we still got cheese. I'm like, we haven't had cheese for days, Dad. He's like, well, we have canned beans. And I'm like, I've been eating canned beans for the last 4 days. I feel like I'm in a fallout shelter. Look, I'm not super picky, but I need something. I just need a little bit more. I need a little bit of variety. So apparently, the grocery run is tomorrow. I can't complain too much, right? I feel bad complaining a little too much because it's not like I'm the breadwinner in the house. So I just have to, hey, patreon.com/TiganMoon, by the way. Help me buy groceries for myself. We have no comments or questions. We did not have a single comment last time. We are comment barren. If you have a question, leave it down in the comments below, and I'll definitely get to it next time. Because I always go through all the questions that you people leave when you decide to leave them. Anyway, we've got quite a bit of stuff to talk about today. I think the biggest thing is a review of the Game Awards, which happened this past week or last week. The Jeffies, as I've started calling them. So I kind of anticipate the Game Awards being bad every year because they've always had a certain level of badness to them, whether it be the poor pacing, the overabundance of commercials, the weird nominations, just the onslaught of celebrity cameos that really come across as, I don't know, unconfident. Unconfident or inconfident? I'm going to say unconfident. In an unconfidence in the industry. The one bright spot every year is wondering what Muppet guest there's going to be. This year it was Statler and Waldorf, the 2 film critic guys, and they had one really good zinger where they asked, hey, that's Hideo Kojima. Did you know he's friends with Jeff Keighley? Yeah, do you think Kojima knows that? That was pretty good. For anyone who isn't aware of the lore behind that, Jeff Keighley and Hideo Kojima have had a friendship that goes back probably at this point 10, maybe 20 years. A really, really long time. I don't know when the first time they met was. And throughout the years, they've maintained, from what I can tell, a very close friendship, and it seems like they are genuinely really good friends. Jeff was a very public supporter of Hideo's when he was getting totally screwed over by Konami around the time Metal Gear Solid 5 was coming out, and he left. And that was the year that Kojima was not allowed to attend the Game Awards to accept an award for Metal Gear Solid 5. And that was when Jeff got up and made a little statement explaining that Konami had barred him from attending. Jeff has always gone to bat for Kojima, and he is... So here's where it gets funny. So Jeff is... he's Canadian. A lot of people assume he's American. Jeff is a Canadian man, a North American white fellow. And he, I think, expresses himself, and he's an on-camera presenter for most of his life at this point. Probably he's been in front of the camera, entertaining, hosting, communicating and being charismatic, and he has obviously developed a personality and a charisma, and he's very open about, he's very emotive and all that. And Jeff, so whenever Jeff talks about his friendship with Kojima, he's very enthusiastic, and it's obvious. You can tell how much he cares about him. And Kojima, by contrast, is like a very, I'd say, like, traditional Japanese, like stoic Japanese man. He looks very fox-like his face, and he's pretty quiet, and he's not really bombastic in the same way. And I'm sure that he also feels similarly about Jeff, and I'm sure that he also values their friendship very much, but because of the different ways that they express themselves, it always comes across as Jeff has a one-sided romantic obsession with Kojima, and Kojima could not care less. That's what it's like always been like. Jeff is just hopelessly... Kojima is the Zato to Jeff's Venom. In any event, that was a little digression. It was a little digestion, like I'm digesting my food right now. I've had my complaints about the Game Awards in prior years, and I was going into this fully expecting it to be, we always have a bit of fun. I just like being on a live stream and chatting with people. I expected it to be a little bit miserable. There's always been something, right? I expected something cringe and weird and funny to happen. I expected all of that. Honestly, the usual from what I've kind of come to expect from the Game Awards, even in their better years. And I have to say, 2024, of all the years that I've been watching them since at least 2021. So I can't say I'm the utmost expert on the event. But from all the years that I've been watching it, this was probably the best one. I think this was definitely the best one. The number one indicator of that to me is that when I finished it, I didn't feel exhausted. I finish every Game Awards and my brain just feels hammered. It's just that dull, like, I just want to go home. I feel like I've had a long day. It is a 4-hour show, but it's an award show. It shouldn't feel like a exhausting day at school or work or something like that. I feel like I've had a slow, mostly mind-numbing day doing something I wasn't that interested in. And this year, I did not have that. In fact, I felt energized enough that I stayed up an extra hour to watch the Virtua Fighter showcase that happened about an hour after the show. We'll talk about that a little bit later. This was, so a number of improvements. I saw people saying that, and I agree with this, I think each Game Awards, each subsequent TGAs has been kind of a response to the previous one, to complaints of the previous ones. And, 2023 kind of felt like it may be an over-adjustment from 22. 22, you had the like 7-minute Kratos speech. 2023, you get the please wrap it up as fucking Game of the Year is giving their acceptance speech, right? Like, overcorrections. Some things are better, some things are worse. This felt like the year where all the complaints and all the feedback actually kind of coalesced in a balanced way. And it felt really well paced. Obviously, there's a lot of advertisements, okay? And I kind of get it. It's like, okay, you want to do the biggest night in gaming. You want to put on a big show. There's a lot of staff. You got to rent out the theater. You need to work out a bunch of deals. You have to pay for like a ridiculous number of people to get catered, and there's musical performances. Like, there is a lot of overhead involved in this production. This doesn't just happen, you know? And this does not air on cable TV. There are no ad breaks. There's no commercial breaks. This is a live streamed event. And in fact, a live stream event that is encouraged to be restreamed. Watch along streams are totally permitted by them. So, where does the money come from? Well, the money comes from really expensive trailer spots. The reason they charge so much, you know, people were talking about, oh my god, you know how much it costs to get a trailer in the Game Awards? And it's like, yeah, it's kind of like the Super Bowl. It's a really big day. It's a really big event. And they do kind of have to pay for that somehow. I don't know the exact margins on what they make on it. I'm imagining that if it's gone on for this long, it has to be at least enough to get the next one greenlit. And also, I think Keeley did say that certain games, like smaller indie games, I think they like negotiate it per like the size of whoever's asking for it, like whatever publisher it is. Because there are quite a number of indie games and all that, and it's like, okay, you know, it's the system. You gotta afford it somehow. My biggest complaint, besides just like, okay, well, it's a lot of trailers, is in previous years, it felt like there were these trends. It felt like there were these trends of you would just see the same kind of game in one way or another, just over and over and over again. One year, it was all like dark medieval fantasy. Dark Souls was really in or something like that. The next year, it was like vaguely sci-fi, dark, gritty sci-fi action shooter things with minimalist UIs that are just, you know, a bunch of lines. And eventually you see so many of those that your brain, they just all blur together in your mind, and it gets really repetitive, and most of them are just CG trailers. They're essentially just concept trailers. Not much in the way of gameplay. And it's all like, it's essentially all flash, and it starts to really wear off when you're like 3 hours in. This year, I would say with all but one exception, there was a very good variety of games. In fact, I have a whole list of things I'd like to talk about in a moment, to quickly go over. But just looking at them, I'm like, there was quite a good variety of different things shown off. Not just like in the size of the projects, but also aesthetics, markets, things like that. I'm not just seeing the same thing over and over again. There's, I came up with this term. Maybe there's another word for it. I call it I call it, what is it? Wait, what did I call it? Not decision. Opinion fatigue? Opinion fatigue is when is my term for when you're shown a bunch of stuff that you have to make judgments on over and over and over again over a long period of time. I first kind of realized this when I binged a bunch of Maximilian Dude's Rate the Super videos, where he just, he and his friends just look at every super in a fighting game and they just judge it based on how cool they think it is. And obviously you're playing along with it at home because the whole thing is just, oh, how cool does it look? and what are like the little details that you're looking for, and comparing it against the other supers in the game. And once you watch like 4 or 5 of those in a row, man, I find out that my brain is just like, I don't know, like a 6, a 7. I don't know. That's pretty good. It just, that's why a lot of people say, critics tend to be more middling or harsher sometimes on what they review, because man, when you have to look at so much stuff and make evaluations of so many different things over and over and over again every single day, eventually a lot of things, you get such a wider perspective than most people, where you're like, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, how much of this as a whole is actually super exceptional. I'm sure you love your family, but compared to every human being who's ever lived, are they really that special? Like, I don't know. Is it a weird comparison point? But that's like what it is. So the variety of things that were shown off and the fact that they were so different really helped ease that up. That I don't feel like I'm just seeing the same thing and having my brain just has to come up with something to say because I'm on a live stream about like, well, yeah, it could be good. That's my line. I go, it could be good. The one exception is, damn. So I watched this with Prox, my friend Prox, and we could not tell. There were so many Chinese, Korean, Japanese, anime style something or other that with such similar art styles that we just could not tell them apart. There was at least like 8 games, like 8 trailers that started up where we go, is this a Hoyoverse thing? Is this a Genshin thing? Because we don't know. And one of them I think was, or there was like 2 or 3 Hoyo somethings or others, and there was a bunch of other stuff that wasn't. Like there was a dungeon fighter. There was a dungeon and fighter game that was revealed. It was just like a no gameplay at all. I don't even know what it is. Is this a MiHoYo? It's like a mobile game. It's a god awful name. It's like Wuthering Waves. Terrible name. Is this a Hoyoverse? No, it's not. Okay. Yeah, that was the one thing that really bled together. Was, damn, there's a lot of games that look like this. This is the Asian equivalent to the Call of Duty military shooter. And that kind of general aesthetic doesn't do a whole lot for me. So that's why it's the closest thing to the big overwhelming trend of the night. But even then, didn't feel like that much. I think there was enough other stuff in there. Stuff like the first one that I wrote down, Clive in Tekken. Yeah, the final guest character, or the final DLC character for the first season of Tekken 8 is going to be Clive, the main character of Final Fantasy 16, which surprised me quite a bit. I guess they've already done Noctis before. A lot of people wanted Tifa. I guess Clive is the other most sensible option from like a business person's standpoint. Excuse me. Because, well, he is the protagonist of the most recent game. That's cool. There's a game called Steel Hunters, which is about mech. Whoa, what the? Okay. Sometimes Audacity freezes for a second, and I get really scared that it's crashing. Game called Steel Hunters. It's some kind of giant robot mecha PvP or PvE game. I don't know. It looked cool. I remember it looking cool. It was just like a concept trailer from what I can tell. I don't think there was any gameplay. Maybe there was. I don't know. Also, on the topic of mecha games, Mecha Break got a trailer with a release window and a bunch of new features and stuff. A bunch of new mechanics and and content shown off. Mecha Break is I guess, like a spiritual successor, or very much inspired by those Gundam EX Versus games. Incredibly fast, team-based mech combat. It is an insanely insanely aerial game, contrasted against Steel Hunters, which seemed a lot more grounded. Mecha Break has characters. It is extremely anime. It is like high-powered anime, giant anime robots. There are ones who are, more ground-focused, but there's a good number who can fly. There's ones who can actually literally just transform into jets, and you take off, and it's like, you feel like you're breaking the sound barrier. I played an alpha for it a little while ago, and I thought it was really fun. It played really well. There were some cool characters in it. The gameplay felt really solid, and it just, in terms of stuff that is coming out now, felt very unique. So I think they showed off some extra mobility stuff or something like that. Anyway, it's releasing they pinned it for spring 2025. So I look forward to that. It looks really cool. Mecha Break. A game called Catly. This is a game that's been stirring up a little bit of I believe this is the one that was being worked on by, was this Yu Suzuki? Let's see. I seem to recall that Yu Suzuki was he working on this? Was he announced for this? There was something that he was working on. There was something that he was working on that they showed off. I don't remember if it was this thing. I'm not seeing anything about it. So the first thing that tipped Steel Paws, a different cat themed game that's going to be exclusively on Netflix. Steel Paws. Okay. Netflix games. Right, so Catly was this trailer that just immediately struck me as really odd. The trailer has no gameplay, as with many trailers, what's new. But the look of the trailer was just strange. It's something about cats. There's a bunch of cats, and they're just kind of running around in these very poppy, almost like a music video set. Pink, and there's like bubbles around, but there was something weird about like the way that they looked. The texture of the fur was off in this way that it didn't look like how you would assume a human being would choose to texture fur on a cat, which was either an extremely odd art style choice, or what many people have been jumping to, the trailer was AI generated. It almost certainly looks AI generated. It has very little cohesion in the way that an AI trailer tends to have. It's only 50 something seconds. Oh yeah, this shit is so AI. I'm watching this back again. Yeah, oh my god, the way that things move and they morph. Oh my god, this is so AI. I couldn't tell it on the stream exactly. I think it was really thrown off. I wasn't expecting to see a fucking AI generated trailer on the Game Awards. Shots are very short, and I imagine it took a lot of work to produce. But yeah, the shots are very short. There's not a whole lot of visual cohesion from shot to shot. They spend a lot of time like cutting around. Everything looks super strange. The way that stuff is framed is extremely AI. AI really likes to do. AI loves center frame. They love like center frame subjects with, what is it, like a low depth of field or something? AI's really, they love doing that shit. There's a couple shots that break that mold, but that thing is absolutely AI generated. The trailer, at the very least, tells me nothing about the game. I saw some people posting the descriptions of the game on its website, and it is 100% AI generated. Just a really, really weird thing that I imagine we'll be seeing some videos on in the future when/if it releases, as that weird, if the game does not heavily use some kind of AI generation, or I'm betting AI or crypto, and if it doesn't, it's just going to be, I imagine, just super, super crappy and low quality, because when I see a product marketing itself with AI imagery, I think low budget kind of crap. I think, like, I don't know, like uncreative. You couldn't come up with a creative solution to a lack of, say, I don't know, 3D animator. Low creativity, low talent. That's what I get from that. That's the one exception to an otherwise pretty interesting list of things that I came up with, like Outer Worlds 2. So Outer Worlds 1 came out around 2018 from Obsidian. Obsidian, who you probably known best for Fallout New Vegas. They left from Bethesda's wing to go make games on their own time, and they made Outer Worlds, which I quite liked. I know that there were people who were more into the WRPG scene who were, I don't know, a little cooler on it, and we're like, well, it's fine. I think the main problem is that of that style of first-person RPGs, first-person open-world RPGs, Bethesda's kind of the only team making it. They're kind of the only people who do that style of game anymore, at least on a larger budget. And the problem is that the last time they did it, it was called Starfield. Well, for as much as you could say about the Outer Worlds, people say, the common things I've heard is that it kind of ran out of gas, or it had kind of simplistic mechanics and stuff like that, role-playing elements. You know what? Sure. I think at the very least, it had a personality and fun writing, and I thought pretty fun characters and side quests and stuff like that, and some good jokes and satire, and I don't know, I thought other than that, the gameplay was pretty solid, enough to keep me playing to, I think, basically the end. I have such a bad habit of not finishing games. So I quite liked it. If you aren't familiar, Outer Worlds, the first one, is, like a very, that kind of Fallout style RPG, first person. You do recruit a bunch of different cast members who all kind of hang out on your ship, and then you can take along like 2 of them per mission. I guess KOTOR style or Mass Effect style, I don't know, whatever you want to pick. It takes place in a solar system that is being actively colonized and pioneered by corporations. Every planet is essentially owned by different corporations, and they're all vying for power. And there is it's an intense corporate capitalist satire of the businesses, and what if you just literally allowed an entire planet to be owned by corporate interests, and what would happen, and what kind of policies get enforced. The game's first planet is notable for having some biting, venomous moments of it does ease up on that a little bit. I feel like it is kind of hard to stretch that over an entire game. So for some people, they felt like, okay, well, I kind of wish that kept up the whole time. Personally, I found that the individual characters were fun enough to kind of keep me going through it. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I imagine that on their second outing in this setting, that they will hopefully make some improvements or whatever, or expand on the original game. Outer Worlds also came out, as far as I know, pretty clean. Not very buggy in terms of what you might expect from a Bethesda game. I mean, that has a lot to do with their engine. So I'm definitely going to be looking out for it. And I think if that interests you, maybe you should check out the original, maybe catch it on sale. I think it's a very solid, fun game with some neat ideas and a nice little aesthetic. And yeah, I think it's a very solid, modern WRPG in that style. Next up, Thick as Thieves. So this one immediately caught my attention because it is a Warren Spector-led game. Warren Spector, he's the creator of a couple games that you might have heard of, or a lead designer on, like System Shock, Deus Ex, Epic Mickey. Yeah, so System Shock and Deus Ex, I think, are like, do I put them in like my favorite of all time? I don't know, man. I feel so, I am so hesitant to create like a top favorite list or whatever. But I would give them the Tigan quadruple thumbs up seal of approval and say, I would say even, especially Deus Ex is Deus Ex feels like an essential game. Like, if you were to make a Criterion collection for video games, Deus Ex is one of those games that's kind of a shoo-in my opinion, along with, Half-Life or, I don't know, Mule or fucking Tetris or something like that. There's a lot of isn't there some gaming hall of fame? I don't know. Apparently it doesn't have as much prestige as the Game Awards. Anyway, Thick as Thieves is an idea that I'm surprised hasn't really been attempted before. It could be that immersive sims just generally, it's the so-called immersive sim curse where they don't tend to sell very well. I think that has to do with them being, it's kind of hard to communicate to somebody what's cool about an ImSim unless you know what it is, and it's also like kind of a vague term. It's a vague term. It's hard to advertise to people what's cool about it, and unless you've already played one. If you've played Dishonored, yeah, it's like that. If you played the Deus Ex, even the modern Deus Ex games, yeah, it's like what's cool about those games. I think even Watch Dogs has some elements of that or something like that. Just games with extremely open-ended level design, tons of options and systems. Essentially, you're given tons of tools and ways to interact with the environment in order to achieve an objective. You have an objective, but there's no one single like route that you can take and series of decisions that you have to make to achieve that objective. Systems-based gameplay. So this is a multiplayer competitive immersive sim game that, judging from the trailer, looks like it's about essentially every player plays as a thief who I think might have different abilities or specializations or something like that, and their goal is to steal something on the map, that everyone's going after the same thing, and you're all working against each other, I imagine, in order to steal it first. To me, the idea of having like separate characters with different specialties is kind of like the replacement for the same way how in a lot of immersive sims, you have upgrade trees that let you specialize into different parts of the game, different skills, different types of combat, different mechanics. A lot of them will have like a hacking something or specialty with this kind of objects in the world. Better at stealth, more mobile, something like that. And I imagine that the different characters available will kind of almost represent like different builds that you'd get in something like a Deus Ex or a Dishonored or something like that. A lot of people have been comparing it to Thief visually, which yeah, maybe that could very well be where they're going with that. It looks cool. I am anything that Warren Spector is a lead designer on, I'm going to be very interested in. I love the way that he designs games. I think that historically he has a very good track record of making interesting games, cool games, and I love immersive sims. And honestly, the idea of a multiplayer one sounds really cool, you know? All these different players, you know, 4 or 5 players in one map, and they all have totally unique ways that they can go about something, you know? I mean, I'd love to see all the different systems and mechanics that are involved in it and what they're planning for it. But yeah, I would definitely keep an eye on that. Thick as Thieves. Now, finally, a bunch of follow-ups and reboots and sequels that I don't think anyone was expecting in a row. First off, Turok. Yeah, they're making a new Turok game. That astounded me. It did not even enter into my mind that it could be Turok. I saw the WB logo at the start, and I was like, do they own Jurassic Park, right? Or is that someone else's? That's what was going through my head. Yeah, a new Turok game. I don't have much to say about it. I haven't really played Turok, but it's dinosaur hunting. Okay, cool. Dinosaur hunting FPS. Neat. A new Ninja Gaiden was shown off very early on during like the pre-show. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound. I got to be honest, a little bit confused when I saw it, because I was like, wasn't this already announced? And no, not officially. About 20 seconds of footage got leaked onto Twitter months ago, and I think was swiftly taken down, but I happened to come across it while it was out in the wild. So I had it in the back of my mind, and I wasn't quite as excited for it, because I was like, wait, wasn't this? This isn't a new trailer. I thought I knew this was happening. But evidently a lot of people had not seen it. So, new Ninja Gaiden. And it's a 2D action game. Classic. You know, not the going back to the 2D style as opposed to the 3D hack and slash brawler, whatever you want to call them, of the, when they start doing those, the PS2, I think I want to say PS2, PS3, that era. So that's cool. Completely fucking bizarre. What is this called? I actually didn't write it down. It was like one of the first things that got shown off. It's based off of, I should have looked this up. Oh, I'm such a sham. Shadow Labyrinth. A seemingly search action 2D game based on Pac-Man. It's like this dark fantasy thing, and I'm watching it and I'm like, is that a little Pac-Man floating around that character? And then he starts going waka waka, and then you make a big evil Pac-Man to like attack a boss, and it's like, holy shit, this is just like a fantasy action Metroidvania type thing. But then Pac-Man's there, and he gobbles on ghosts. Apparently based off of the new Secret Level short, or I should say the Secret Level short was based off of this, as part of a marketing thing to prime people to the idea of a dark, gritty Pac-Man. So, alrighty then. Not what I was expecting, but I'm welcome. I'm open to experimentation. Let's see where it goes. I think all the secret levels are out now. I was holding off until they were all out because there are a couple that I was actually kind of interested in watching. I just didn't feel like watching some and then waiting on others. New Onimusha game. Onimusha Way of the Sword. I have heard Onimusha described as dark fantasy historical Japan Resident Evil. Onimusha is a series that got started way back on the PS2. And it's like horror, samurai, there's zombies, and you gotta kill the zombies and stuff. It was one of those series that I don't have very much experience with. I really should play one of them sometime because a lot of people really like these games. Onimusha is one of those series that people. It's one of those series that people will go, why did they stop making them? I don't know. Maybe they stopped selling as well. Maybe a producer left who was kind of instrumental to the series getting made. I have no idea. But the series has basically just been on pause for the better part of 15 years at this point. And maybe more. Probably more. So new Onimusha, Way of the Sword. Very exciting. Capcom said that they were looking to revive some of their more dormant IPs. This reminds me of a survey that they put out a while ago that said, hey, if you would want us to reboot one of these things, what would you want us to make a new game for? And Onimusha was one of them. And then finally, in that same vein, one of the last announcements of the show built up like right before Game of the Year or something like that, like a little before Game of the Year. This kicked off their, these are the big announcements. A sequel to Okami, or another Okami game, an Okami 3, I suppose, directed by Hideki Kamiya. Which was, they made very clear. Ryan, friend of the show, in the stream, pointed out that he saw Hideki Kamiya sitting in the crowd wearing a Clover shirt. Which I was like, I don't know. Maybe he's just there. Maybe he's just invited. I don't know. People just get invited. And then, actually, they're announcing a new Okami game. I never thought I'd see the day. For anyone who isn't aware of Okami was a PS2 Capcom game. It was kind of I guess I'd say that's one of those games that Capcom puts out every now and again to be like, yeah, we're still like artsy and we'll still invest some money into like a cool, more niche game. I'd say the most recent example of that would be like Kunitsugami. In fact, Okami and that game are on sale in a bundle right now on Steam. So you could go pick them up, both of them for like $40 or something, because Kunitsugami's on like a cheaper discount, I think. Okami's like $5 though, so I picked that up. That was cool. There's a big Capcom sale. I also got the original Dragon's Dogma, so because I don't know, I want to check it out. So if anyone isn't really familiar with the history, Okami was this niche kind of cult classic game. One of those games that gets really high praise, but it doesn't sell very well as far as I know. It got a sequel on, I think, the DS. And that was kind of it. It just sort of stuck around as this very cool game about the sun goddess Amaterasu in the form of this wolf going around, and it has these mechanics where you do like Japanese calligraphy to use your abilities and stuff like that, and to interact with stuff. And it's just like a cool artsy game that has it's neat. It's a fan favorite. But again, it's been dormant for a while. I think maybe most people would know the game now because Amaterasu is in Marvel vs. Capcom 3. So the fact that, so the other big thing is that Kamiya's back to direct it. That is a big deal because Kamiya left Capcom kind of on bad terms. Essentially, he made a couple. So Kamiya directed the original Devil May Cry. When did the timeline line up on that? When did Hideki Kamiya leaving Capcom? Because I want to make sure that 2006. He left Capcom in 2006 to form Platinum, and Devil May Cry 1 came out in 2001. Okami was 2006. So that was the last game that he made for them. A situation that I had never really thought about got brought up to me I was reading a Reddit thread about how big of a deal this was that they got him back. If you don't know the backstory behind Devil May Cry 1 and 2, essentially Kamiya directed 1, and it is a very Hideki Kamiya game in terms of attitude and style and just being a very unique voice, you know, unique enough to basically form the foundation of a genre. And he's like, all right, cool, can't wait to do the sequel. And Capcom said, actually, while you were working on it, we greenlit a sequel, and it's being worked on by our shit team, and it's gonna suck balls. And he was like, oh, okay. They basically took like his baby and then made a robot baby and smashed it in front of him, which I can't imagine feels very good as a creator. probably burned a little bit of goodwill between him and the Capcom executives, whoever was making those decisions. It was probably Inafune. Dude, what's fucked up is it might have been. Like, it actually might have been. I don't know who made that decision. So, after Okami, I have to imagine that Kamiya felt very stifled and like he was kind of getting fucked around with at Capcom. And so the fact that he came back, I think shows a tremendous amount of goodwill. I can't imagine that he would go back to Capcom if he wasn't feeling really good about it. Apparently, he also did an interview recently where he talked about leaving Platinum. And the way that he described it, essentially Platinum started out as like extremely artist focused, so much so that they were kind of bad at doing business. And then eventually they had to focus more on business and got creatively stifled, and they're still bad at business. So he was kind of getting fed up with that shit as well. Platinum has kind of been on their last legs for a while. All they really had recently was... What's the last... Oh no. Don't tell me it was Babylon's Fall. Don't tell me it was Babylon. Astral Chain, okay. Oh, fuck, Bayonetta. Oh, fuck, Bayonetta. No, Bayonetta 3 and Babylon's Fall were after that. No. That's rough. That's right? Is that the most recent? Yeah. Damn. Oh, sorry. Bayonetta Origins. That's the most recent thing that they did. Yeah. That's a bummer. That's a little bit of a bummer. So, what was I talking about? Right. The fact that he's back, I think, signals good things. Now, mind you, they did announce it, and they said that it is just about to enter production, or maybe even pre-production. So maybe all of this falls apart in the next 2 years. But hey, but what if we get a really good Okami game out of it? I also think it's encouraging that after Kunitsugami, which many people were calling like this generation's Okami, underperformed, that Capcom was actually willing to take another chance on, an established brand, but I don't know, calling Okami an established IP is... it's a little bit of high praise. It's no Resident Evil. They're still willing to take some amount of chance on it and make a big-ass announcement on the biggest stage possible before they've even started work on it, actually. So, a little bit of confidence. They got to keep pumping out those Resident Evil remakes so that they can fund all of their artsy shit. Now, finally, and I want to serve as a little bit of a transitional point to talk about something that you can actually get in your hands right now. Virtua Fighter 5 Revo So again, this is something that there's been a roughly 4 or 5 year, probably maybe even longer, build up to this being announced, or to really Virtua Fighter 6 being announced, which it doesn't have a full title yet, but that's essentially what they said. There's a new Virtua Fighter game, an actually new VF in development. They showed off 3 seconds of gameplay. So why is Virtua Fighter a big deal? Because there is essentially a remaster of the previous game, which has now been released on Steam. There's a free public beta, is what they're calling it, with online and training mode and every character unlocked, and everyone's got at least 2 costumes, I think. A little sparse, but the game did come out in like 2012, so fucking having 100 costume DLCs was not the norm. Playable online right now with rollback. You can go play a new VF game for free. Sorry, I say new. A remastered VF game for free online with rollback right now. So why should you care about Virtua Fighter? Why is Virtua Fighter cool or important? I'll answer the importance first. So Virtua Fighter is probably one of the more important video games ever made. During the stream, I made a comment that because Prox he knows Tekken. He's played Tekken before, but he's not very familiar with Virtua Fighter, as many people are not familiar with Virtua Fighter these days. And the way I described it to him, because he's also a huge Quake fan, is from a technological standpoint, Virtua Fighter is kind of like the arcade/console equivalent to Quake in terms of its raw influence. Virtua Fighter 1 was the first 3D fighting game, and it is the reason that the PlayStation 1 was 3D. Essentially, it was originally planned as a 2D console, and some group who was working on it, some in the research and development or the engineering or somebody, essentially saw Virtua Fighter in the arcades, and they went, holy shit. If we can get this working in people's living rooms, we're going to win. We're going to win. And because back in the day, arcades were like the technological hardware showcase places, basically. Because when you're making a console, you're making something like small and consumer grade and actually, accessible from an accessible price point. You have to make some concessions, or you previously did have to make some concessions about the power of your system. Arcades, it's just a big box. You just gotta dump whatever you want in there. Obviously, they had limitations, but the ceiling was way higher compared to what you could achieve on consoles. Arcades were always on the cutting edge, really far ahead of what consoles could do. Consoles were like, oh yeah, but you can do it at home. Like the difference between seeing a big movie on a big IMAX screen versus, like, I don't know, on your laptop or something. Like, yeah, it's kind of like the same experience, sort of, but it's not really. Virtua Fighter was a turning point where PlayStation said, we got to do that at home. And they were right. They were able to do it at home, and they did make all the money, and they did win. They set them up for many years of success. Funny enough, while looking up some sources and some quotes for stuff, just, I was curious about that, revisiting in my mind, preparing to talk about it on this podcast, I discovered Virtua Fighter was also an inspiration on Quake. Isn't that funny? Yeah, there is an old, I'll link it below, there is an old interview from, what is it, EGM? Sorry, it was Next Generation. The June 1997 issue, they had an interview with John Romero as he was preparing to, he had just announced Daikatana, and he mentioned that, they asked him, like, did Quake go the way that you wanted it to? And he basically, in the course of his explanation of his answer, he basically said that, so this is kind of a known thing, but Quake started out as a fantasy game, like a medieval fantasy game that was more based on their Dungeons & Dragons sessions, and the main character was going to, I think, be named Quake and wield a hammer was going to swing around a big hammer. That was the idea. And he said, I can read the quote right here. My original idea was to do something like Virtua Fighter in a 3D world with full contact fighting. But you'd also be able to run through a world and do the same stuff you do in Quake, only when you got into these melees, the camera would pull out into a third-person perspective. That did not really work out. It was a little too above what they could handle, and people weren't as enthusiastic about it as him, so Quake has a big clusterfuck of a development history, but yeah, the idea, I think, especially to make it full 3D, was definitely inspired in some part by Virtua Fighter. I don't think you can pin it all on Virtua Fighter. That's just kind of the direction. That's just kind of the direction that games were heading. I think it was pretty clear, especially to id and especially, John Carmack, who those guys were always pretty ahead of the curve in terms of graphics and stuff. But Virtua Fighter was hugely influential. You might also, you can also credit Virtua Fighter with being kind of the reason that Tekken is good. Tekken started out as essentially a Virtua Fighter ripoff with a few of their own little ideas. The controls were kind of different and this and that. And that essentially sparked a years-long friendly rivalry, a friendly creative rivalry between the Tekken and VF teams at Bandai and Sega, respectively, where Virtua Fighter was always a huge innovator. Virtua Fighter was a very innovative series in the fighting game space and in gaming in general. In terms of graphical hardware, in terms of online functionality. I think were they the first fighting game with online? I don't know, but they were super early and definitely the first 3D one. Including things like robust training modes and just like mechanically very innovative. They would do things like, okay, first we've got the infinite stage, and that's what Tekken also had, the infinite stages. And then Virtua Fighter's like, what if we did enclosed stages? What if we did more enclosed arenas and we had terrain and stuff? And Tekken was like, oh yeah, what if we did that times 1,000? And they did Tekken 4, and it was like, okay, maybe a little too much. And then Virtua Fighter was like, we're gonna do that even better than you. And then Tekken was like, we're gonna do that even better than you. And then you get Tekken 5, which is like, oh, they figured it out. They figured out how to do walls and corners and stuff like that. There isn't like a phone booth in the middle of the stage. Virtua Fighter ultimately went away for, not an expert, but I do understand a bit of the situation. Its weaknesses were, okay, so number one, I think you have to acknowledge that Sega, so the last real release of a VF game was VF5 in 2006. And Sega is like one of the most self-sabotaging companies ever. And I imagine that probably had something to do with the fact that, certain parts of for a little while, for years actually, they were kind of just the Sonic and Yakuza devs, and Yakuza wasn't even popular outside of Japan. So they were kind of just the Sonic guys to most people, and they kind of tried something here or there, and it didn't really work. And the other reason is that Virtua Fighter is, some people say, boring. I think that's a little, it's kind of true, but it's a little ungenerous. Ungenerous is the word? It's not, you could be a little more generous with it. I would say the appeal of Virtua Fighter is that it's really grounded. Virtua Fighter has the Tekken always went in. Tekken pretty quickly started going into like crazy fantasy stuff with like the devil gene, and they've got in the first game they have bears. There's genetically engineered velociraptors with boxing gloves fighting. A little dinosaur from a manga for some reason, like robots and stuff like that. Virtua Fighter is like all different martial artists, and they're just doing martial arts. It is very it's very low to the ground. It's very, very no nonsense, and it's kind of pure in that sense, at least in a presentation way. There is a little bit of ridiculous stuff. You've got a ninja, and he flips you like 10 feet into the air and body slams you and all that. And there's juggles, and there's a little bit of, we're getting creative with gravity and stuff like that. There's a couple characters who are a little out there or a little bit, SNK looking. But for the most part, Virtua Fighter really presents itself as a much more down-to-earth fighting series. And I would say, from what I understand, it also has pretty accurate martial arts in terms of what the characters are actually doing as representatives of their respective styles. Even on the character select, you get a little detail about what their actual fighting style is. And they're all real schools of martial arts for the most part, as I understand. And then from there, essentially, I would say, so that's like, what's appealing about it? It's important. It's important, sure. But that kind of, if it's so important, that kind of like, I don't want to say white bread, but that kind of simplicity and low to the ground nature, I think just didn't stack up as well against Tekken, which was, as the years went on, more and more concerned with big, flashy particle effects and fucking crazy super moves and all that. Tekken was very flashy and in your face, and then it had the gameplay to support that, to back it up, essentially. Virtua Fighter didn't have like the real flash to it, and I think that kind of led to a slow, maybe lack of interest. There wasn't like a huge hook for VF. But as I've described before, that the hook versus the meat, VF has a lot of meat. Because as many people who have played it will tell you, VF is very fun. I jumped in, I played a little bit of it. It's a really cool game. So that gets me into, you ask, it's very influential, Taigen, but so was polio. They made a whole vaccine for it. Is Virtua Fighter better than polio? Yeah, I think a little bit. Virtua Fighter is an extremely aggressive game, which puts it at a contrast to, traditionally, Tekken. I understand it's kind of funny now because Tekken 8 is the most aggressive Tekken ever, where they've literally built systems in to just get your fucking ass in there with like the heat gauge and all that. Dash the hell in and get new moves and supers and stuff like that. Virtua Fighter is extremely aggressive in that you are you're rewarded for being able to constantly move around and attack and keep your offense up and read your opponent's defense. What's kind of cool about it is that it's not just about when you're on the defense reading the opponent's offense, but also the opponent on offense has to read your defense because of the way that the mix-ups kind of work. Being a 3D fighter, there is sidestepping, so there is a distinction between moves that are linear, as in they just kind of shoot forward, which can be easily sidestepped. I think you're like totally invulnerable during a sidestep. But there's also a bunch of moves that spin. They are like circular attacks. Some of them have to be dodged a specific direction. Some of them cannot be dodged at all. They just have to be blocked or ducked. Of course, ducking is a thing, as the same way it is in Tekken. Grabs are extremely fast, and grappling is just a core part of the game. There aren't really characters. Like in Tekken, you can watch like 10 matches of Tekken and no one ever does a grab. Unless it's like King, like a dedicated grappler. In VF, grabs are constant. They are like a really integral part of offense, and to the point where it's almost like a mid and high and grab, like mid-high grab, duck, and then evade different directions. Like those are the mix-ups. It has an incredibly in-depth system with very simple inputs. It's not a hold back to block game. It's got punch, kick, and guard. Punch, kick, and a block button. That's genuinely it. They don't even have a fourth button for, like, you know, a typical face button on a controller or anything like that. It's 3 buttons. And you think, like, well, how much can you get with 3 buttons and only two attack buttons? Yeah, you'd be surprised. Characters have very lengthy, in-depth move sets. And at the highest level, it does get pretty complex. And you do have to know, like, this character is facing this way, which means that they have this move that I have to dodge this way. But if they're facing the other direction, like if their body is turned the other way, I'd have to dodge the opposite way. It's got stuff like that. But at a very basic, simple level, it's got the same sort of Tekken appeal of you kind of get in. Well, you get in because the game encourages getting in, because you're not involved. You can't block while backdashing, which means that defense is actually kind of risky in that way. Because you can't hold back to block. So you get in and kind of like press buttons, and oftentimes just pressing like punch, like so many characters just have like a punch, kick, punch, forward punch, kick, something like that. Everyone's got a bunch of strings like that. They've got all sorts of different directions they can do. If you're curious, the training mode actually has a command training section where you just go through a character's entire move list. Combos are very short. They last like maybe, there's a couple juggles, but they last like maybe 3 seconds. They're really short. VF is played more as like a rapid fire game of inches where you are constantly trying to almost like out tempo your opponent and read them on both their offense and their defense. And they're trying to do the same to you. So it's a highly interactive game. Matches go very fast. The timer starts at 40 seconds, which is crazy. It goes to 3 rounds. You have to win 3 rounds to win. It's best of 5. So yeah, best of 5. So there's a little bit of accounting for how quick the matches are. Like, people will just be trading blows back and forth and just chipping away, and then someone gets a combo, and then okay, now they're on 20%, and then one or two more missed interactions. It is a game that is all about, like, I was kind of surprised going into the training mode, because I like labbing. I like just messing around with characters and finding little combos that I can do or experimenting with stuff. VF maybe at like a very high level for like trying to counter specific things, but it's not much of a lab game from what I can tell. I was kind of surprised. I went in and I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, you can get this launcher and then do this, and then that's kind of it. You can get a follow-up. Pick whatever follow-up you'd like to get after your launcher. You're doing like maybe 2 strings or something like that. You're not doing gigantic ass Tekken combos unless you're like near the wall or something like that. I should also mention there's totally ring outs in VF. You can just actually push if the wall is low enough. You can genuinely just dash into someone and push them off. It's very funny, and it is an instant lose. Just all of these different combinations that you can get. I was impressed by the number of, like, just going through like the commands that they'll be like, yeah, do this when your back is to the wall, and you'll get a unique move. When your back is to the wall and you're like the opponent is towards you or something like that. Your opponent is near the wall. You can do the specific thing. Like, when you are on the left side of your opponent, you'll get this character gets a unique grab. And every character is packed with stuff like that. On top of already having some characters who have different stances, like Vanessa. She has an offense and defense stance with completely different gigantic move lists. If it sounds intimidating, it kind of is. But honestly, at a really basic level, you can kind of just go in and press buttons, and pretty much everything's going to start with a punch or a kick, or, pressing a direction while doing that. And you don't have to know too much, I think, especially at like a low level to get started playing it. And it's also, again, a game that I don't want to say it encourages mashing, but there's definitely brutal ways to punish people for playing defensively. There's a lot of moves. I don't know if every character has this, but there's a lot of characters who have just guard break moves. Moves that will, like, if they just hit regularly, they're like fine. But if they hit an opponent who's blocking, the opponent gets whoa, they go kind of, their arms go flailing a little bit, and then you can just get a full follow-up. Like, you can genuinely get combo starters if you can get a starter into a full combo if your opponent is blocking at the wrong time. That's why, ducking and sidestepping are, and I guess backdashing to an extent, are also like important skills. It's a very cool game, and I look forward to whatever the RGG team does with the sequel, because they announced a sequel. So yeah, I would say check it out. Again, it has an open beta. Virtua Fighter 5 Revo open beta. You can find it on Steam right now. It's free. It has online. You get every character. Go in. It has rollback. It is, from what I can tell, pretty good online. Go in and mash a bunch of shit. Yeah. Virtua Fighter 5. All right. I'm going to talk for a little bit about some things that we watched recently. Kat and a friend of ours went to a screening of, it was a double feature screening of Mary Poppins and Sitting Pretty, which is a film I hadn't really heard of. So Mary Poppins, I don't have to introduce Mary Poppins. I haven't seen it since I was a kid. And I always had kind of a fondness for that movie. I think one, because I was a kid when I saw it, and it's very sweet and whimsical, and it's a great kids movie. But also there's an added fact that my mom is now again a nanny. She's always worked in childcare. When I was growing up, so before I was born, she did nanny work. When I was growing up, she worked at like a preschool or like a daycare center. And then, and now she is back in the nanny game, if you will. And so I always kind of had like it's about like a magical nanny. I thought that they should have done a double feature of Mary Poppins and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang as whimsical Dick Van Dyke musicals. But no. Everyone's great in it. Everyone is great. Let me look up the cast. I mean, everyone kind of knows the Julie Andrews, Dick Van Dyke. Who plays the dad again? Who plays the dad? It's David Tomlinson? Yeah, it is David Tomlinson. Wow. Okay, so his headshot does not have his silly mustache, so I couldn't tell. Yeah, everyone does a great job in it. I forgot how funny it is. It's a very funny movie. I think it's actually aged quite well, for what it is, for being from 1964. We were genuinely laughing a lot at it. Very charming, fun movie. Tons of imagination and just like a feel-good thing. Great movie to watch with kids. I don't really have to talk about Mary Poppins too much, besides to say, yeah, no, shocking opinion, Mary Poppins holds up. After that, pretty much everyone cleared out of the theater, and we were like, well, we bought double feature tickets. Let's, I don't know what Sitting Pretty is. So the reason that this was a double feature is that Sitting Pretty, let me get the movie and not the TV show that was based on it. Sitting Pretty is a 1948 movie, which is also about a nanny. So it's an American film, and I think that there's something very funny about it. The British funny nanny movie whimsical, fun, lighthearted adventure, fully animated Disney segments, magic and fun for the whole family. Mary Poppins is this wonderful, patient but stern and responsible, but positive, magical figure. The kids are these cute little. They're a little bit of Ruckhausers, but they're good kids. And then the dad learns the lesson at the end about being a little silly and not being so stuck up and impersonal and caring for his kids and all that. I forgot that the mom was a suffragette. She was a British suffragette. She has a whole musical number about it. That's I totally forgot about that aspect of the movie. That's the British version, right? The American Funny Nanny movie, first 5 minutes, kids are little shits. The dog is a murderer. The dad, a pedophile. And the nanny, she's drunk off of her ass. She is drinking on the job, and she quits. She quits in the first minute of the first thing in the film. It's very American. Everyone in this movie. So first of all, this movie is great. Sitting Pretty is great. It is honestly really funny. It is so, it caught me super off guard. I didn't really know what to expect. I was not really expecting it to be as strange as it is. Everyone in this movie is so fucking weird. It takes place in a fictional town called Hummingbird Hill. There's these two parents, played by Robert Young and Maureen O'Hara. They have these three kids who are just these three boys. One of them is a baby, but the other two, they're like 7 and 10 or something like that. And they're these little monsters, and they're driving the nanny insane. They have this dog who's running around and killing cats. And it's just chaos. The nanny quits, and they're like, oh, God, we got to put in an ad for a new babysitter. We can't find anybody. And then the last one that they try is this girl named Ginger from the neighborhood. And it's their last one because the wife really doesn't want to, because she's like, Ginger has a big crush on you. And to be honest, I think you have a bit of a crush on her too. And the husband is like, what? She's like 16. I would never. And then they have a scene of him driving her, like he picks her up from her house, and she's like completely coming on to him and trying to seduce him. And he's like, this is all right. And you're like, okay, cool. He's an ephebophile. I didn't want to be disrespectful. He's an ephebophile. And then like they fucking leave to go to the dinner party that they're supposed to go to, and he like sweeps his wife into a kiss, and she's like, ooh, why are you so romantic all of a sudden? And he said, Ginger's perfume just brings out the beast in me. So we're like, what the fuck? So they come home. Ginger has invited some of her teenager friends, and they're throwing a party with dancing. Can you believe it? So they get mad. They throw her out, and they're like, fuck, what do we do now? So the wife decides to put out an ad in the paper, and they get a response. They say, we're willing to, we want to hire a full-time nanny. We'll provide you room and board and everything, and you'll live here as long as that's cool with you. And as long as you can handle the responsibilities of being a nanny. And someone named Lynn Belvedere replies and says, yes, I would like to, I can do that. I'm well trained in all these things. They say, great, show up. Lynn Belvedere shows up, and they're expecting I think in the letter it said like, I'm a student of psychology or psychiatry or something like that. Lynn Belvedere shows up. They're expecting maybe like a college girl. And no, it's like a 50-year-old guy. It's like a 50-year-old guy who is, you're like, what is, okay. Lynn Belvedere might be a top character of all time. Lynn Belvedere is essentially the 1948 equivalent of, we eventually came around to trying to describing him as the gay autistic Grustler, that's Grinder and Hustler. He is essentially perfect. He knows everything about everything. He is always calm. He is incredibly witty. He is arrogant, but he's like, he always backs it up. He's like Doctor Doom. What a nerdy reference. They ask him what his profession is, and he says, I am a genius. They walk in on him on his room. He's doing headstands. He's like, it's yoga. He's always got a zinger, but he's not like a making a bunch of jokes guy. He just says it, and he's so right. Like, the wife is talking about the husband, and she's like, oh, that's what I love. That's what I love about him, is he's so modest. And Lynn goes, well, he has very much to be modest about. And you're like, oh, shit. He has had every single profession in the world. He has been a beekeeper. He was an army medic in World War I. He knows everything about, like, what does he do? Like, doesn't he do, like, mechanics or something? He does... He's an expert in science, all sciences, all philosophies, literature. He knows everything about every time a situation comes up. The whole movie is a situation comes up, Lynn Belvedere solves it by some arcane knowledge he happens to have. And he's always just like, yeah, of course. He's like an animal trainer. He's done everything. At one point, the wife asks him, is there anything you haven't been? And he goes, yes, there is. I've never been idle or bored. And you're like, that's my hustler. And he just has this completely straight, he never reacts, he never has a big reaction to everything. He is just hustling. He's got this super weird vibe at first, but he's always just taking care of business. He's the best nanny. He reiterates several times, he doesn't like children. He goes, I don't like kids, but I am an expert in dealing with children. And he is an amazing... He turns those boys around in, like, the span of 2 days. There's, like, the little baby keeps throwing cereal at him, and he fucking dumps it on his head, and he's like, he will never do it again now. He is incredible. The main conflict of the film comes from another character named, like, something Applewood. And Applewood is essentially the town gossip. He lives at home with his elderly mother, who is also just, she's in like a wheelchair and she just loves gossip. She just sits with her binoculars out all day and just watches the neighborhood and snoops. And he's like her little agent. So his thing is he has these lilacs that he raises. And he essentially uses that as an excuse to go around and check other people's flowers. But really, he's stealing mail. He tries to like steal mail from the mailman. And the only reason he doesn't is because the main characters are like walking out of the door at that second. And they're like, oh, hey, you got our mail? Thanks. And he's like, oh, I was just about to hand this to you, actually. Save the mailman 5 seconds of walking. So basically he's the town gossip. He's a snoop, and he is always trying to get some dirt on someone and spin it into the most apocalyptic, insane thing possible. So essentially he's always trying to come up with something that Mr. Belvedere and the wife are like, they're like cheating. The wife is like cheating on her husband with Belvedere. And it always gets spun into like some absurd, it goes from like Lynn Belvedere was there and the wife was there and Lynn Belvedere was drinking like gin into they were having like an orgy, a drunken orgy. That's like where it goes. And this, of course, upsets the husband because he's like, what the hell have you been doing with Lynn Belvedere? And he's always concerned about her. I think she should be more concerned about her husband trying to fuck a 16-year-old. Hey, Mr. King, Mr. Harry King, I have an anime that I think you'd really like. The first episode especially. I wasn't going to talk about it. I wasn't going to talk about it. Yeah, essentially, the Sitting Pretty, I could best describe it as a kaiju battle between two guys with two different kinds of autism. The one guy is like, and one guy is good and one is evil. It is like a genuinely very funny movie. One, for how strange and unexpected it was. It is almost like such. It's almost aged better because it's old. And I don't know what the reaction to it was like when it came out. Although I guess the film was well known enough to have a 80s sitcom based on it. But like, the fact that it's so old, you don't expect the humor to be as funny or as out there. And I'm not going to say it's like the most incredibly surreal thing ever, but everyone is just so fucking weird. Everyone's always trying to fight each other. It's extremely American. I would say in a fun way. I would recommend it. It is genuinely a very fun time. And we walked out of the theater being like, wow, none of us expected to like it as much as we ended up. Yeah, Sitting Pretty from 1948. And now, oh yeah, okay. One more eyeball thing. So, Kat and I, this is going to be kind of short, I hope. Kat and I started Arcane. You know, we're always on the latest trend, you know? We just started Arcane. I haven't watched it because she's never put it on for me, and as I've said, she is the only reason I watch anything. I just watch what she puts on. And she had never been interested in it. She doesn't care about League of Legends. Although she has heard about it because we live in the Bay Area and she has Asian friends. So of course she's heard about League of Legends. I never watched it, also in part just because I'm like, it's League of Legends, whatever, you know. I have a little bit of PTSD from League, so things related to it sometimes are like hard for me to look at. But I heard it was good and I was like, I'm sure it's good. For whatever reason, I think she said she started watching it, and then one reason or another, we were like, let's just watch it together. She'd only seen 2 episodes. We've only seen 4 episodes at this point of 9, and I have to say, Arcane is, so far, and I kind of imagine unless they completely fuck it up in the last half of the season, or the second season, very good. The show is actually very good and very well put together. In fact, I would say that it's great in a very normal way. In such a normal way that it's almost kind of boring to talk about from a story perspective. I think from an art perspective, it's actually pretty exceptional. I think the direction and the storyboarding and the visuals and all of that is actually great. It's a real visual feast. Really interesting direction. I think it uses the fact that it's animation and you can get shots that would otherwise be impossible. I think it really uses that to its advantage. Some visually great looking shots, really cool framing in a lot of shots. The colors are really neat, what they do with the lighting and all that, to add really intense mood. Very, very striking visual presentation. Probably my favorite part of the show, actually, is just seeing how they present the more, like everything that is emotional feels like there's some kind of a strong visual presentation to go along with it. And I really like that. Story-wise, again, it is just, it's good in a highly technical way. All of the character, they do a good job establishing the setting, because this is, I think it was almost imperative to them. Kat was like, oh yeah, no, I heard that you don't have to play League of Legends to to understand what's going on. And I said, oh, I'm sure that it was a priority that they said, do not make them play League of Legends to understand the show. Do not make them. So it does a very good job of establishing this setting, which is just a small slice of the overall League of Legends world of Runeterra. Establishing this setting of Piltover and Zaun, establishing the rules and the culture and the dynamics that are going on in society that are the kind of spur the characters. The characters are very well introduced. I think the dialogue is very good. It illuminates a lot about who the characters are, what they want, where they're coming from, what they believe and value. And the plot pushes ahead I heard some people say that they thought the opening was a little bit slow. I thought it pushed ahead at a pretty good clip. Like you could take the first 3 episodes and essentially put them together into a movie, right? The same way you could with like Phantom Blood, first 3 episodes of part 1 of JoJo, for instance. And then there's like a time skip to the more modern day. Yeah, it's just everything is established. I think it does a pretty good job at getting you interested, at least in presenting interesting, understandable characters and settings to the viewer, to such a degree that I feel like the only way that you wouldn't like it, that I can understand someone saying they didn't like the show, like actively disliked it, is if you just personally find the conflict very uninteresting. Arcane is a rags versus riches class war kind of story. It takes place in a small little slice of Runeterra, like I said, between these 2 cities, Piltover and Zaun. Piltover is this traditionally very steampunk aesthetic place that then gets kind of industrialized via what's basically technology that harnesses magic called hex tech. That's something that happens during the course of the show, but they start out as steampunky, so they retain a lot of that sort of aesthetic. They've still hung on to that. And Zaun is, what would people call it? I think people sometimes call it a chem punk or whatever. Very down and dirty slums, dark. It's the wrong side of the tracks, factories, chemicals, human experiments, gangs. It's the nice top side, I think that you would call it the top side, and the dingy, murky, seedy underbelly of Zaun. The main characters, Vi and Powder, who's later Jinx, it starts off when they are little girls and then kind of progresses until there's like a break point in the story, and then there's a time skip to them as like young adults-ish. I think like maybe 10 years, I believe. It also includes Victor and Jace in sort of a side storyline to explain the progress that the world is undergoing, which becomes important to like the overall narrative. It does seem to be a story with a lot of societal themes and, people relating to the society around them. So setting the story at a point of flux and a point of development for that society is, I think, a good move. What's almost more interesting to me than the show itself is just the decision-making that I think went into deciding on this story. Because if you're going to do a League of Legends prestige television series, and it's your first outing, and a lot of people, now I think a lot more people are warmed up to the world and stuff, and they like it. This is, when it's unproven, I think this is a very good story to start out with. I think of all of the of the little storylines and locations and things that go on in the League universe, and okay, I'll preface this with saying that I'll quickly add in, I played League for long enough that I can't really remember what stuff they've retconned and what stuff is still in the lore, so some of my memory might be a little hazy. League of Legends completely reset its lore in 2014 after like 4 or 5 years. and they just kind of built up after that. So I kind of forget like what is still around. I believe Arcane is not based off of any particular storyline, but it is essentially taking characters who are pretty popular, who are all kind of involved with each other, and extrapolating a story that involves all or most of them. Zon and Piltover are relatively popular regions in the game. There are tons of characters from both, especially Zon, actually, now that I think of it. And as a story, if you're like, okay, so Jinx, Vi, and Caitlyn were always pretty popular when they were released for gameplay and like aesthetic reasons. Jinx is like a cosplay favorite, you know? And they always had like a connection with each other that was sort of kept vague. It was like a wink wink, like, oh, what is... I think Jinx always had a voice line implying that she had a sister. And it's like, oh, well, maybe there's a... that's one of Vi or Caitlyn, who knows? I don't know if they ever confirmed it in the actual official lore at any point, but in Arcane, that's basically what they go with, that Jinx and Vi were sisters, which I think is pretty... I do like the way that they handle the characters. They haven't like gotten... and they haven't handled like my favorite characters from the setting, so I don't feel too much, you know, they aren't too precious to me. So I can't say that like, oh, this isn't what I like about these guys, but... I do like what they've been doing with the characters. It's also you get the chance to tell a very personal story that has a lot of character, that is driven by the characters. So it can be kind of small scope in that sense. The stakes can be very personal, which tends to be very engaging. But you can also, because of the setting and the context that's required for the setting and the way the context has shaped these characters, you also get to establish a bunch of stuff about the world. And I think about some of the bigger storylines or plot points from the League universe, and it's like, what do I think of? There's like the Demacia Noxus stuff. There's Noxus invading Ionia. There's like the Shurima Ascension bullshit with the Darken. There's... the fucking Ruined King. Maybe they'll do another Ruined King storyline. Maybe third time's the charm. Maybe they'll get it right this time. I think my personal favorite lore thing has always been the thing with Zed, Shen, and Jin. But that takes place... that's like very localized, I feel. That's like a very localized story between like 4 or 5 maybe characters. This gets to involve a little bit more of the universe and actually like establish more. Although I love Jin. Oh my god, I love Jin so much as a character. He's so cool. He was so fun. But I do totally get why this was the one that they picked. Yeah, I don't know. It makes a lot of sense from a storytelling standpoint. And it does feel like, yeah, this is doing service to the potential of the lore dumps that have historically served League of Legends' story and world and characters. I like the direction that they've taken most of the characters. And, I mean, yeah, for now, I mean, I don't imagine the show shaking up too much. It feels very consistent. So I am interested to see where it goes. For the most part, like, yeah, it's honestly, yeah, it's good in a way that makes it kind of boring. Like, I feel like there's not a whole lot to talk about that it does that's super unique from a story or storytelling standpoint. Although there's everything's just very good. The writers are just very good. So I have faith that it will carry that through. I will say probably my biggest negative with the show is the intro. Look, okay, I knew that I'd known before that Imagine Dragons did the opening for the show. They did the theme song. I'd heard the theme song beforehand, and I was like, oh, what is this? And then I found out it was from Arcane. The connection hadn't been made for me at first. So I went in knowing that, and it made sense to me because I was like, okay, they've actually... Imagine Dragons and Riot Games are actually frequent collaborators. Imagine Dragons, or ID to the hip kids, performed at, I want to say, the 2014 Worlds. They've done songs for Riot for other events before. They've actually done quite a bit for League of Legends. Actually, funny enough, tangent. Back in the day when I was really into League, my dad was like, oh, I'm interested in what this thing is that you're always spending all your time on. Tell me about it. And I explained the game to him, and he got really interested in it. And he didn't play it. No. But he did get interested enough to actually watch like professional LCS games with me. And he got actually pretty into it. And he liked following it and having me explain the game to him. And it was actually a really fun time. That was around like 2015-ish. And I remember one day he said, near the start of him kind of doing a little bit of research into the game, he said something like, yeah, I wanted to see what the big finals looked like. And I saw like the world championship or something. And they had this big, really impressive looking stadium. There was a ton of people there. And they had this kind of gay band playing. I don't remember if he said gay. He might have said lame or something. But it was like in that vein. It was like kind of not what the yeah, wasn't too into it. And I was like, yeah, it's Imagine Dragons, or ID to the hip kids. So I knew that, and I was okay. So at this point, I just skip the intro. I just skip the intro every time now. Oh my god, I can't stand. Oh, the misery. Everybody wants to be my enemy. That's what he sounds like. The fucking helium voice. So I knew that. And then I was like, did they do that for the second season? Do you know? Like, did they also get the ID back to do the second season's opening? And she said, Kat was like, no, actually, it's actually 21 Pilots. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. They went 0 for 2. That's crazy. Twice? I can get like, you've worked with them before. Let's tap them to do an intro. But then 21 Pilots. Are you kidding? Maybe this is a me thing. I have never liked 21 Pilots. The first song I ever heard from them was like the Stressed Out or something when I was in middle school. And from the first time I heard them, I was like, this does not work for me. This is really annoying. I can't believe that really boggles my mind. I'm sorry to the 21 Pilots lovers out there, but this is an anti 21 Pilots podcast, and I'm gonna have to. Last time it was Dawn to Dawn, or the time before that. Now it's 21 Pilots. Yeah. That's what I'm gonna bitch about for the rest of time. I'd like not to. So, yeah, Arcane, we will continue it, and we both got pretty into it, actually. By the third episode, Kat said she actually was very invested in it, and in fact, it's gotten so bad that her picture on Discord has been changed to Jinx wearing a Santa hat. So, that's where we're at in our relationship right now. But yes, Arcane, quite good. And finally, I want to give some closing thoughts to a game that has consumed my life, that I have put close to 90 hours into, 87 hours at the time of recording, and I am finished with it finally. It's a game I've talked about before, and that is Wizardry 8. So, I did a little bit of a Wizardry retrospective, at least of the games that I had played and some stuff that I could research about them on a previous podcast. And I talked about Wizardry 8 when I was balls deep into it. And I did the thing that I always do where I put a game down because I have to go work or something for a couple days straight. And then I completely fall off of it and I don't finish it. And I said, no, I am going to finish Wizardry 8. I'm going to do it. I am very close. I knew how close I was. I always drop it right before the end. I always do that. I'm so bad at finishing things. Not because there's some people who are like, oh, I don't want it to end. They get like attachment issues to things. No, I'm just weird. And at some point my brain just gives up and it goes, yeah, I've seen enough. I don't really need to see the rest of it. I don't know why I do this. I do it all the time. Or I get obsessed with doing side content and then I just never finish it. There's too much side content or something. And I'm like, and I should have just rushed straight to the end. And, it kills all my momentum and stuff. And I said, I'm not going to do that with Wizardry 8. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to finish it. I'm like one sitting away from finishing it. I was actually 3 because this game... Wizardry 8 is a game that I would describe as, much like its brethren, much like its predecessors, in many ways actively hostile to the player. It is prickly, it is cryptic, it is unforgiving in many ways. You can completely fuck yourself over with a bad build. It can be painfully unfair at times with massive difficulty spikes, very wonky balancing of when and where you encounter certain levels of enemies. The way that the game communicates information to you is absolutely bass-ackwards. And in many ways, the game is just incredibly janky and outdated and weird. Unfortunately, it also has probably the best turn-based combat I have ever played in a game and incredibly good character building. Not development. Not like character like writing development, but like mechanically like building, leveling up your character and stuff. It is a game of extremes. I still stand by what I said in I think the original segment on Wizardry 8, which is that it takes out just enough of the clunk of the prior games, and it adds it has just enough of a just makes just enough improvements to the user interface experience and the UI and the UX that it reveals that, oh wait, this game is like a complete diamond. Oh my god, and it pains me that games like it have gone completely out of style. Wizardry 8 and the Wizardry series in general are what you would fans of the genre would subcategorize as a blobber. Blobber refers to the fact that these are party-based games where you create a party of characters, but the game takes place in first person and you never actually see your characters in the world. Essentially, the idea is that your party functions as a giant amorphous blob in the world. It's a little bit of a silly description, but that is kind of what you are. You're just like a blob with appendages that can just reach out wherever. That represents your whole party. Where do I start with? Okay. Do I start with the negatives or the positives? I guess I can start with the negatives. A couple very practical things. Getting the game to run on modern systems is not impossible, but getting the game to run in widescreen took some effort. If you install Java, the game will not start up. Why? Because it's a PC game from 2001. Fuck you, that's why. So yeah, jank. I got a couple crashes while I was playing, especially the more that I was reloading, like quick loading and stuff like that. Which is important because Wizardry games are games about saving and loading. to the degree I would say it is almost necessary because some of the dumb bullshit in this game. Yeah, so on a technical side, it's a little rough. It deserves a remaster to get, brush it up a bit for the time being. The draw distance is hilariously short. It is you're like, okay, yep, they had some technical limits. You know what's crazy about this game? I found it out after I finished it. The lead designer was Brenda Romero, as in John Romero's wife. Apparently she'd worked at Surtech and done a bunch of Wizardry games. Fucking go figure. I had no idea. Other negatives. Okay. I would say the biggest problem with Wizardry 8 is that the way that information is communicated to the player about what they need to do is completely asinine. Basically, everything that things that are optional will be explicitly stated to the player to tell you to go do. Things that are necessary, figure it out, asshole. Fucking figure it out. Which leads to very confusing moments where you are given explicit directions to go do something in what is very clearly like the next major area of the game. You do that, and then you're like, what do I do now? Then you look up a guide, and it's like, oh, I have to backtrack and do like 5 other things throughout this area that I was actually supposed to do. And it starts with like a secret item that's only found in one corner of the world. Let me give you an example. So, the basic plot of the game is that you're trying to find these 3 MacGuffins, these 3 magical items that were created by the Cosmic Lords that control and shape all aspects of reality. Let's talk about the process of getting one item, the Destinae Dominus. So the Destinae Dominus is a like stone tablet that has all of the universe's knowledge within it. At one point in the game, you will be directed to go get the Destinae Dominus from its hiding place in these watery caves that are hard as fuck. Another difficulty spike, at least for me. The way the level scaling worked out. The Destinae Dominus, because once you get it, once you put it into your inventory, every single character goes insane because it's too much information. That's what's implied, is that like your characters are driven mad by the knowledge of the Destinae Dominus, even just holding it. And you will only, if you're holding it at all, that will happen to you. If you try to travel anywhere, if you try to rest, it will happen. Yeah. How do you avoid being turned insane by the Destinae Dominus? You're going to need the Helm of Serenity. How do you get the Helm of Serenity? Let me tell you. So the second real major, you call it a dungeon. The game has an interesting, it's technically a city, but it's also like a dungeon, essentially. It's called Trinton. It is a gigantic interconnected tree that is inhabited by these these giant like rat mouse people called the Trinies, and they live in this tree, and you walk in and they're like, hey, there's these rats. They're called the Ratkin. I guess the Trinies are like mice and the Ratkin are rats, and there's an infestation of them. Please go kill them. Please go kill as many of them as possible and kill their breeders, as they're called. The breeders are gigantic, overweight ratkin, which I thought was a little strange. They're also holding axes for some reason. You have to fight them, and they're really strong. So you go through, you're clearing out the ratkin, and there is this one side area. This is a gigantic, sprawling map with like 3 different levels. It gets very maze-like, and there's tons of different little areas and bows, as they call them, or bows. I don't know. Bough. Bows, I think. There's all these little temples that you can go at for this and that, and there's enemies here, and then you got to go here, and then it is a very complex area. And tucked away into one little corner is one room. It's a some kind of building, some kind of house with a pedestal that has some kind of indented groove on top that you have to place. Clearly, you have to place something on top of. You get a bunch of items that like look like they could go on there. None of them do. So, 15 hours later, you are going to the castle of the guy who took all of the MacGuffins. His name is Martin. And Martin's castle is now being run. It's being, what is it called? It's being holed up by the Terang, who are like insectoid slug people from outer space, they're like a militaristic race, and everyone's trying to get all the MacGuffins, essentially. Everyone's going after the MacGuffins. So you have to go visit them and do some stuff over there because they're in his castle. While you're at the castle, here's what you do. There is a side room that you have to explore. And again, the castle layout itself is also a little bit confusing, and I kept forgetting if I had already been in a room or not. You have to go into a side room up a flight of stairs, and there is a weird little tiki type statue, like it's like a cylinder. And when you take the cylinder, you black out, and when you wake up, one of your party members is gone. If you inspect the cylinder, it says Rook on it, or Crook, or something like that. And you're like, you have to make the connection that is talking about an NPC who you might not have even met in a prior area of like a swamp, this gigantic open swamp map. You have to go to Rook. It is Rook. Talk to him, and he's like, yeah, I kidnapped your friend. Then you can like, I can give him back to you if you do something for me and go kill a giant frog. Or you can just kill him. I decided to do the frog for the experience. Get your friend back, and now you have, well, I guess you always had the idol, but you should probably have a full party, because you should have a full party. I lost like my bishop, like my main healer, which was not good. So now that you have that idol, what you have to do is go all the way back. You have to be like, what is this for? I found it in the Terang Castle. What could this be for? Oh, I have to go all the way back to that one corner that I've completely forgotten about in the Trini treehouse, and then put it on the pedestal to open the door. Oh wait, sorry, I completely forgot a different part. When you go underground into like the underground part of the castle of Martin's castle, as you're walking around, there's like a bunch of paintings on the wall. You have to figure out that you need to go up to one specific painting. Click on it, which will give you a description of it. Click on it again, which will open a wall. You will operate it, and it will open a wall like a secret passage. Go down the wall, find a secret hideout with one of Martin's journals. Read the journal, and in the journal, there is a specific line that he writes that is like in quotes or something like that. You have to remember that line, or write it down, or look up a guide or something. Then you go back to the Trini treehouse, open up that one door with the idol, go in, there's a shaman in there. Oh fuck, I forgot. Before you can get the shaman to appear, you have to, at a different part of the treehouse, there is a little temple. There's a temple where there's like, you can get some leaves from this plant. And then you have to figure out that when you use the leaves, it says you like try to eat them and you hear a voice. You have to figure out that you then have to go to a potion seller and buy what is literally labeled a mystery potion. Then go to back to a different temple, eat the petal and drink the potion, and then a shaman will appear to you and then tell you something that you're like on the path of destiny or whatever, then disappear. Then, after you've done that, then when you open the door, the shaman will be there in that little side tree house that you unlocked via the pedestal, and the shaman will be like, what was the fucking one phrase from Martin's diary? And you have to write out like an entire phrase of poetry. And then he's like, okay, go, here's a key. go to this general area. You're like, okay, fine. Was there something locked over there? I don't remember. It's been like 20 hours. You go back over there. There is one door that's like the first door on the right that's locked. You go in. There's nothing in there. It's like this dilapidated room. But there's a sign on the ground. You click on the sign and it just reads the sign out to you. But then you got to click on the sign again. And then the sign moves. And then there's a hole underneath it that you can drop through. And then there's a chest, and you open the chest, and that has the Helm of Serenity so that you can pick up the Destiny Dominus and not go insane. That's like 10% of the game. That's not even the only time something like that happens in the game. None of that is outlined to you in any clear way. There is a journal. There's a journal that lets you, like, it tells you kind of like some stuff that you've learned, but it is really putting a lot of faith in you to take notes. It's putting a lot. Eventually, I just stopped using the journal because after a couple instances of this mission critical thing was just not explained to me, I was like, oh, the journal's just useless. Because the game is going to tell me all the side objectives, but I just have to use a literal guide to tell me what I need to do next to actually advance the plot. The whole game is like that. It is fucking maddening. And by the end, I was just relying on the guide because I was never going to figure half of this shit out. That's not to say the things you do aren't fun. They are fun. They're just presented to you with like no direction at all. Is this mission critical? I don't know. Is it a side content? I don't know. There are cool systems. So like the dialogue system is pretty neat. Essentially, you talk to an NPC and there is a list of topics you can ask about: people, places, items, and like miscellaneous. And you can just talk about it, or you can ask where it is. So if they say, you got to go here, you can ask, where is that? And they will give you a general direction. And that's kind of neat. There is also a text parser. You can actually input custom responses and things to say to the NPCs. And many of there's only a couple legitimate options, but some of them are actually, again, critical to knowing what to do. And that also was not clear to me at all. Excuse me. It's the same text box that when you like click on a topic, it'll go in that box. I didn't know you could actually type in it. You can. And the specificity is like, okay, I remember this one moment where in order to get information about what you have to do next out of they're called the Mooks. They're like a Wookiee race. There's like a Mook guy. And when you're talking to him, he's like, I have a theory that will change absolutely everything. Something like that. What is I forget. The wording is such that it's like something like a new paradigm. I have this theory that's new. And there's like 3 phrases I went through that seemed pretty reasonable to me that essentially equated to, tell me about it. But the only one that works is the phrase theory. No other thing that relates to it. Like there was some very intuitive. Hang on, I think I was reading like the hardcore. There was like a hardcore gamer write up on Wizardry 8, and I remember them citing the exact same thing. Let's see. Yes. When a certain character mentions his theory about the true purpose of an object. Yes, okay. So he says, I have a theory about the true nature of this object. So you can ask, true purpose. Purpose. Nope, don't work. You can only do theory. Or if you ask about the object itself, nothing. Doesn't work. Stuff like that is just... So the game's development history is clearly very... The end of the game the last 10% of the game definitely feels a little unfinished. I would hope it's unfinished, because if that's how it was intended to be, it's a little lame. So basically, SurTech went bankrupt in the middle of production. However, it was being made by SurTech Canada, which was a different studio that I don't think was quite as affected. So they just kind of kept trucking along developing it until it was finished, and then that was their last game, and then they shuttered along with the rest of the company. So there's parts where it feels like maybe this could have been reworked. Maybe this could have been rewritten. Maybe this could have been tested a little more. How intuitive is this actually? And the game does get very silly like that at points. On to the positives. So, this game's combat is incredible. It takes place in first person with a party of at least 1, but up to 8 characters, because you can actually recruit NPCs, which is really neat. You will level up a lot slower, but fights will generally be easier, because experience gets split. So you have this first-person combat where essentially once combat begins, you basically lock in all of the actions that you want each party member to perform for that round, and then the actions for everyone involved in the fight proceed according to initiative, I believe. Yeah, well, it's got to be initiative, which is tied to like speed, I think. I'm not actually sure how the initiative stat works out. And yeah, I mean, it seems very simple on surface level, but just all of the little mechanics of, it's not just like, okay, I get to queue up all my actions, cool. But there's these little things you have to deal with, like spacing between characters, party formation, having to readjust by like walking, for instance. So distance is an actual factor. Characters have reach that is based off of their weapon, and that can be affected by their position in the party. There's an entire screen where you can change the positioning of every member of your party within like your default formation. So you can tuck like the mages in the back, or maybe the fighters in the front and stuff like that. You can have I have my ranger on the flank to give him enough distance so that he doesn't have to switch to melee once we get up close to the enemies. You have to, if you are out of range, if you are facing, you could be facing the wrong way, like too far away. You can be facing, too far away for a particular party member to actually be able to attack an opponent, and you have to actually adjust. You have to adjust your facing in between rounds. If you're too far away, you have to queue up a walk or a run action, and the further that you go, essentially, the more turns that you're giving up for your characters. Like if you queue up a run and then you run the whole distance that's allotted to you, you have a little bar that goes down as you move. You've essentially just skipped. That's all you're going to be doing for your turn. You're using up your actions. So positioning yourself to a point where you are close, especially if you have a really good melee party, where you are close enough that you don't have to do a lot of repositioning and just getting the maximum number of attacks, is this constantly important skill that you have to grapple with, essentially. The character building is really, really enjoyable. Again, this probably has the best this easily has the best character creation process of any of the Wizardry games that I've played. Previously, it relied on fucking nonsense die rolls to determine what classes you were allowed to pick, and it varied by gender for some reason, and race. It was really, really weird, like, I think stupid system. This you can just pick the class you want and character creation. You can switch classes during level up, although it is not really encouraged. which I kind of wish it was. I do actually think that switching classes is a fun idea, and I like the variety that it offers. I love anything with a good job system. There are a ton of classes on offer, and they range from basic classes that just do, your general fantasy classes to, the fighter, mage, priest, ranger, to hybrid classes like samurai, who are melee casters, or I think bards. They're like a unique thing. They use items instead of spells or attacks to perform these songs that give different effects. And then there's I think there's 2 elite classes in bishop and ninja, who they have way more options open to them for what spells they want to go into or what kinds of weapons they want to use and stuff like that. The bishop can learn any spell from any spell school, which makes them extremely flexible and strong, although they take a while to actually build up. But my bishop was super critical to my party succeeding. He was mostly a healer. I built him as mostly a healer, which probably wasn't the most optimal choice for such a flexible class, but it ended up working out. I had a fighter, a monk, a thief, a ranger, a bishop, and a mage. That was my setup. And that was usually the kind of setup that I went with in the previous games. 3 melee, and a ranger, and 2 casters or something like that. There is a really wide variety of spells, and the spell system is really unique. It's complicated. Essentially, when you in your character's stats for the caster types, there are there's 4 different spell schools. The wizardry ones, which are elemental magics, wizardry, psionics, alchemy, and divine. Yeah, divinity. And those spell books learn spells from the 6 different spell schools. So not all of them get all of the spell schools in one book, but they kind of tend to specialize in them. The wizardry ones are more of the elemental magics. The psionic ones are obviously mostly the mental magic field. Divinity is obviously the divine magic, which has most of the healing stuff. And alchemy has a mix of water, earth, I think divine. It has an interesting mix of stuff. And you level up, not just, it's again a little confusing, because when you get your level up and you can assign your points to your different skills, you can level up both the spell book and the spell school. So you can level up your wizardry, and you can level up your fire magic, which will technically that means that because your wizardry is higher, you will be able to learn more spells from the wizardry spell book. And because you level up fire, your fire is going to be stronger, and you can cast it at higher levels and stuff like that. There's all different types of... The magic is really fun in this game. One, because there just are so many spells, and that's what makes leveling up so much fun with your casters, because they just get access to so much stuff. Spells that target all different types of... there's single target, there's group stuff, AoE things, there's things that just hit every single enemy in the battle, and they have plenty of tons and tons of different effects. It's the debuffs. You can make a whole group of enemies insane, drop all their stats, freeze them, to just cast waves of poison on them. And everyone has different elemental resistances and stuff like that. It actually makes the wizardry school a little bit weak as you go on, because the armor doesn't tend to scale nearly as high as the magic resistances, the spell resistances. So magic that is pure damage starts to really fall off later in the game, which can be a little bit rough unless you're like hyper specializing and you really know how to build. I did not, so I had a bit of a struggle in the late game. There's just something so fun about the tactical aspect of the game and all of the, like, a well executed fight is incredibly satisfying when you understand how you need to play it, what enemies you need to target first, what kinds of spells to use to counter them, the basic game plan you need to take to the fight. You know, you're taking the same characters, but you kind of do have to play them slightly differently depending on what enemies you're up against, what the shape of the room is. Like, the hardest fights in the game, easily the hardest fights, are when you're against any kind of ranged enemy in a wide open space. The wide open spaces are more dangerous than the, like, tight corridors, because you can easily just bum rush someone in a hallway. But when you're in the open plane, oh god, you get aggroed from, 100 feet away by 5 ranged enemies, and they're just pelting you with stuff before you can even close the distance. Those are easily the hardest fights, and where it gets, I'd say, the most frustrating. But when you got kind of like a mid-range battle or something where you have to, something where you're able to more quickly engage with the opponent, I find the combat really shines. You have to crank up the battle speed to max, and there's even mods that make it even faster because it can get very tedious. At worst, it gets extremely tedious because you will get into fights with, no joke, like 30 participants, including your party. And it just keeps stacking and the way that aggro works, like, especially if you're in the open world or the overworld, the enemies will just, more enemy groups will just keep aggroing. You'll go from like one into another gets aggroed, into a third one gets aggroed, and it is a bit of a slog. It can definitely be very sloggy at its worst moments. But in its best moments, it's like, despite the fact that at many points the game completely drove me up the fucking wall, I'm like, damn, I just really want to play more again. Like, I finished it and I had the urge to go start another save or something like that, to go start a new party, because I just wanted to try a new build. I wanted to try a new party. I wanted to try a new setup. And will I do it again? I have no idea, but it is an incredibly flawed, fucked up game, but I do love it. And what's so embarrassing is that if it weren't for mouthwashing, this might be my favorite game of the year. That's what's so embarrassing, is this game. This is like my version of Divine Cybermancy. I could easily see someone picking this up and just bouncing right off of it. But I'm not going to lie, I really, really do love this game. And if you are willing to put up with fucking nonsense, and you're willing to go through a little bit of technical headache to install some mods to make the game run a little better, and any of this sounds interesting to you, and you're willing to use a guide, I would highly recommend Wizardry 8. And it gets me real hankering for another blobber with a cool class system. I will say, again, the ending is very lackluster. The final boss is an actual joke. There is a fight that happens a couple hours before that is easily the hardest fight in the game. It is a giant. It takes place in a big open field. You have to fight like 4 packs of enemies and 2 boss characters, one of which spawns more enemies, and one of them casts instant death on your party, although not super often. And one of the groups of enemies also spawns like elementals and stuff, so just the enemy list just keeps going higher. It's the only time that I actually knocked the difficulty down to novice, because it took so fucking long, and it took so long to lose to get to the point where it was just a disaster and it was unsalvageable, that I just got frustrated, and I genuinely probably spent like 6 hours on one fight. And then after that, like, you go a little more, you go like maybe an hour or two in, and the final boss is a massive pushover. It's super weird. He is incredibly easy. And then your party floats up into the stars for about 15 seconds before something in the scripting fucks up, and you drop down to the ground and take half your life in fall damage, which was hilarious. And then the game ends. Man, I really want Wizardry to come back, and specifically this Wizardry, because I find their particular blend of sci-fi and... Wait, there's just like a whole plot point that happens. Like, a character dies right before the final boss, and they're like, we gotta go fix it. And then you beat the final boss, and it's just like forgotten about. Like, maybe they did it, maybe they fixed it, but anyway, the particular blend of sci-fi and fantasy and these alien creatures who almost look normal next to the fantasy guys. You know, there's like minotaurs and rodent people, and fish people and stuff like that. It's so cool. I really do like that setting and that aesthetic, and having this medieval fantasy world that has like a takeoff tower for spaceships, and there's also like a pirate ship over there, is so neat. It's very unique, and I think they hit upon something that I find much more interesting than just the straightforward fantasy of the previous games. Diehards will lament the fact that they went fucking sci-fi. I don't listen to them. I don't listen to most CRPG fans. They are the worst fan base. And I wish there was something in the specific style of 8 with this combat system and this kind of like class system and this aesthetic. Oh man. Can I say Wizardry deserved better? Because there are like a ton of spin-offs, but they're all like fantasy spin-offs. They're all based off of like the older games. What I'd give for a Wizardry, a new Wizardry, a Wizardry 9. Maybe someday it'll get rebooted. I don't know. There was an MMO for a short while that got shut down. But yeah, Wizardry 8, one of my top games of the year. Slightly embarrassed to say, but I would recommend it. It is a very cool game. I think it's worth playing through all the bullshit. I'm not going to say I love it because of its bullshit. I'm not going to go that far, but I do love it in spite of its bullshit. And I do love it. And with that, I think I'm going to draw this to a close. You can check out, well, hang on. I say other stuff before this. If you've been listening this far, thank you for listening to me ramble. If you have a question, feel free to leave it down in the comments below, but please phrase it in the form of a question, because I'm not just going to read your thoughts out loud. Check out the most recent video on the main channel. I also uploaded a supplementary video just now. I was super lazy about editing it, so it took like 10 days of my reaction, like a highlight reel of my reactions to The Ultimate Gamer. And if you're curious about that, check out my Patreon and yeah, take care of yourself. Bye.